Welcome back to Leverage Supply Chains, the show where operators unpack how modern supply chains actually work. The automotive aftermarket may look like an e-commerce business from the outside, but underneath, every order is a global supply chain. Overseas production, long lead times, inventory bets, supplier changes, and a customer who still expects the right part quickly. Urban Import has been building in this market since 2001. Today, it manages more than 1,000 products across 5 in-house suspension brands and 2 U.S. locations. I'm joined by Jonathan Guerrero of Urban Import, a customer who recently deployed Leverage AI to talk about how a lean team manages that complexity, why they modernize purchase order visibility in their ERP, and what implementation really required and what has changed since go live. Jonathan, welcome to the show. Before we go deeper into the supply chain and the workings of what you guys do, let's give listeners a sense of your path and how Urban Import became the business it is today. Give me the rundown, the path into Urban Import. What is your role? Put you closest to every day? How did you end up there? And let's begin there.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. Urban Import, we've been in business since 2001. We basically started as an eBay seller and then got exclusive rights to some popular brand or some well-known brands, D2 Racing and others. And then we just grew from there. And as for me personally, I started at a very low rung, just entry position. As I became more familiar with our workflows and I started to identify problems, errors, and other things, small things that just accumulate, and I started fixing those. I just kind of made myself a position here that allows me to manage pretty much any project that comes to our hands.
I love that. A Swiss Army knife, as some say. Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting because I love the narrative of Urban Import around how you started with the enthusiast roots and now operate in-house brands, not an easy task, and an evolution of, I think, what I call customer demand or pull. From your experiences, you've been there since the early days. How did the business and its supply chain evolve as that portfolio expanded?
Oh, well, it certainly got more complicated, especially when we started focusing on fulfilling kit products or products with multiple components. That on top with the fact that we have multiple warehouse locations, that's really where things got really complicated on the internal end, because some of our kit products have so many components and it's really hard to, first of all, see how many of each component is necessary for a product and in which location those components are available. So yeah, as we grew, as we had a more diverse product catalog, it certainly got more complicated in that way. And not to mention customer service and other things that you might encounter with a business like ours.
Totally. Well, because of that increased complexity, I think it's very fascinating because it's deceptively challenging from what you present to the customers versus the reality, what goes under the hood, especially delivering on what I think many call like the simple customer promise of just a fast, speedy, snappy purchasing and customer experience. But most importantly, though, you have to get the right product and the part to the right person quickly. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if you have like one popular product or one that comes to mind from the factory to customer, and what do you think typically has to go right from purchasing, inbound freight, inventory, fulfillment before the box ships? Would love to talk about that journey that you've had to help construct.
Yeah. So, we do have some popular products. Well, first of all, our coilover products, they're fitment specific, but we also, and our Stroup products. And one thing that can work with any of our coilover or Stroup products is the management that we offer, the things that basically the mechanism that helps your suspension inflate and deflate. And those products are manufactured in-house, and some of them have up to 30 components and even components that have components. So maintaining inventory for those for every component, while maintaining a just-in-time inventory model can be really difficult, and it involves constant monitoring, constant ordering, constant forecasting.
Totally. Well, that's a really great example and something that else came to mind, especially when it comes to custom parts. Have you seen any common early signal that would typically tell you that an order or launch is at risk in that workflow?
Actually, no. There was actually basically no signals. When we were at our worst, right? There were no signals. Basically, we would get to the last product, and sometimes the inventory might have been wrong on our end, so we wouldn't find out if there was an issue until warehouse staff identified the fact that we don't have any of some particular component left. So there was really, yeah, we were kind of just out there, just suffering
That's
uncertainties.
yeah, it's wild, especially when you expand, right, with the brands and the product offerings. And I would love to pull that thread a little bit more on the complexity behind the catalog, because as you described, the vehicle specific products create a very different planning problem than a generic SKU business that I think others are probably more used to. With the thousands of products across street, track, off-road, OE replacement applications, what makes fitment specific inventory hard to plan?
Well, we certainly have contracts to fulfill, so there's a quantity aspect of it, and I'm probably not the best person to speak on it, but I do know that we have to. Well, first of all, we have a good knowledge base here on our team. Multiple of our staff here, multiple members just off the top of their head know if a specific component fits on a specific trim of some specific car. So we really do lean on them a lot and have to interpret trends as well. Yeah, one thing for me as a non-automotive expert person that kind of like shocked me is that we focus a lot on Honda Civics. A lot of our products, the most popular products that flow through our inventory, are geared towards Honda Civics. And those are just, enthusiast market cars, late 80s, 90s cars. So, yeah, we have to interpret the market, the desire. We got to see trends. We got to spot, emerging trends as well and stock for those cars. At the same time, understand that our product isn't for everybody, and at the same time also offering the capacity for custom made air-mailed products directly from our manufacturers. So we offer a balance. So we can plan for popular models. We can offer custom made on demand for less popular models, or we can even plan for the future and have something on order for when our big containers of inventory come in, basically.
Love that. And I can only imagine that that diversity is a necessity to be competitive and also deliver value and trust with the customers, which I've acutely been a part of as well, and I think that's great. You did mention something specifically around working with the manufacturers or suppliers as you build out these different workflows and different channels and capabilities. Anything that you wish that those manufacturers gave you a little bit earlier, or information to help you in that workflow?
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially in the case of having multiple warehouses, what we'll do a large forecasting blanket order, but we won't know exactly where those quantities will be shipped to, essentially because there previously was a lack of communication in that way. And maybe there
Right.
was also just a missing component in our workflow that would allow us to really specify quantities going to each warehouse. But on top of that, since we have to order large amounts of inventory, often 90 days in advance, it's hard to have a clear ETA for the dealers that offer our products as well. So that I wish that we had almost a sort of GPS method to seeing
Mm.
that inventory come in.
We'll dive into that a little bit more. Maybe that was a little bit of a leading question, but would love to rewind to the operating model at Urban Import before any real automation and how we think about anchoring that to the manual work to specifically make it tangible for the listeners. Before you got involved with and dug into the build out of this automation workflow and even to include leverage in that piece of the puzzle, can you describe some of like the normal purchase order life cycle look and what that felt like? within your ERP as it goes from the creation to acknowledgement, changes, shipments, receipt. We'd love to talk about the life of Jonathan and or Urban Import team before any of that was put in place.
Yeah. So I guess it's important to know for a company like us, I would describe ourselves as non-traditional. We build relationships and we kind of maintain like they were our real friends. They are our real friends actually, and we hang out with them. So that kind of leads to a like private relationship expectation. And that's kind of what I kind of perceive we had, where we had to directly communicate with somebody at our supplier and receive, quantities and pricing in that type of thread. So we would then have to take that data, piece it together sometimes. Maybe it might have been split in that thread, or maybe it could be provided in an Excel document. And then whoever was maintaining that conversation would then input a purchase order. So that was the first stage, and this process was broken up between a bunch of us here. So that created a couple of issues. One, since we have kit products, and some of these products that we order them as kits, even though we have the capacity to break those kits up when we physically have them here. That makes a verification. It makes verification more complex, basically. Not anybody can verify one of our packing lists against one of our invoices, against the data that we've input into our program. But that just added a bunch of difficulty and specialty that we had to focus on here. But yeah, basically that was the timeline. We would order in a basically archaic type manner through email. We would input, we would verify, and then non-traditionally, our last component was to verify physically. Physically that the quantity of products was here. But I say non-traditionally because we received those products before we verified physically. So that caused a lot of issues on our end with inventory accuracy. But unfortunately, that's what we had to do because those are the resources that we had available to us.
I love that last part, by the way. I think a common thread I've seen across our customers, whether it's manufacturing or distributor, is you sometimes just have to do what you have to get done.
Mhm.
And that's the reality of it. In that motion, when it comes to the workflow and entering the purchase orders and what a typical buyer would have to work, any idea how much time in a given week would be spent sending, chasing, interpreting the data, rekeying the information before any automation was put in place?
Yeah, actually. Yeah. An uncalculable amount of time. And I say that because, like I was saying earlier, our suppliers are our friends. The first time that I realized one of the people here was a superhuman was when I would see him talking to our suppliers via email at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. So that's why it's you can't calculate it, to be honest with you, because it's an ongoing conversation, and literally I would say at least 30 hours a week.
Wow. And as you know, keeping now then the ERP up to date, the intent of that is to help support other workflows. I'm very curious what other, as that information ideally was or was not before automation in the ERP and the systems to help support, what other workflows were impacted along the way with and without that data?
Before automation?
Yeah, before automation, when it comes to thinking about like what other workflows relied on keeping, the ERP or the system of record up to date, I would love to think through or would hear your perspective of what was kind of the top workflows that were impacted, whether it was or wasn't present.
Yeah. So we were certainly creating more work for ourselves and on all workflows, basically, by not having, first of all, accurate quantities. Yeah. So there would be many times where we would, fulfill an order, print out a label, get ready to ship it, but it wasn't there. So that doesn't only affect warehouse staff. That once we've identify an error like that, it creates a kind of a trickle up additional labor. So we would have to physically confirm inventory. We would have to go back to that purchase order invoice and packing list to confirm there weren't any other errors. Yeah, obviously, if it was a kit product and one of the components was missing and the picker had already gone through half of the components he needs to gather and then realizes that he's missing one critical component, he then has to put all those other components back. So yeah, it's a real trickle up all the way to the customer, all the way to us
Mm.
having to notify them, we're sorry, we can back order this for you, you know?
It's crazy. And I think similar thread that I've heard, what you're describing is that the gap of that visibility from the supplier or into the ERP of the context really moves both directions, right?
Yeah.
Which is I think we've talked about this. I know we've talked about this, but sometimes you have to figure out what the right actual root cause problem is to solve to help support solving those other pieces, which has been a fun collaboration even outside of some of this conversation here. Well, we'll love to talk a little bit more about, if that being the before state, now thinking a little bit more post things like leverage and other tooling that was implemented to help support the automation. What was there a trigger point or what led to you making the decision to take action on towards automation versus more people and or other types of different ways to solve this? And also then why not things like other types of solutions like EDI, supplier portals, or custom ERP workflow? There obviously, I know, was some type of decision logic of both why and what. Would love to hear your thoughts on
Yeah, so yeah, here at Urban Import, we're growing and we could have kept on the way that we were doing and just spread the task of purchasing over more people, but we're already pretty burdened with labor, with tasks and stuff here. So the decision to automate just seemed natural because, like I mentioned earlier, these inconsistencies were reverberating to everybody up. Everybody, it was trickling up. And having the capacity to outsource the data input to a supplier, it not only makes it easier for any internal user here to see the ETA of any specific component, but it also, I feel, makes it easier for the supplier where they don't have to, for example, if we had sent them an email for a specific component ETA, they'd have to go review that ETA and respond to us by wording an email, basically. With a automation type solution, they don't have to do the response to us, basically. They can just input the data and send it over to us, and it's automatically input into our program. So that certainly it was uh, a decisive feature. But yeah, and I don't think we really considered many other options for this specific process. I think that this one was the leverage was the first one that just kind of hit everything for us. Yeah, I don't remember looking into many other programs because none of them automated it in this way. None of them promised to outsource basically to the supplier. Yeah, and
it.
that's pretty important.
Totally. Well, glad we crossed the checks there and the threshold in the process. 'Cause I know you were very involved with both the implementation and going live and wrapping up with the suppliers. Any specific edge case you thought was particularly hard or that was uncovered during testing that comes to mind?
Edge case. No, not really. Not in terms of like real maximum and minimum data, but in terms of person to person communication, that has been revealing to me where yeah, it's difficult to communicate these days with anybody, especially with abstract and specific questions that may revolve around quantities, unit prices, components of a bigger parent SKU. So yeah, just it has increased my communication with our suppliers, and that's been pretty revealing. And it's also been very helpful actually, because now we are basically kind of restarting our relationship, kind of starting from the beginning. And I think that's helpful because maybe we forgot something about our old process and we had just kept on at it with missing components. But now we have the opportunity to start new and decisively make a workflow that works both for us and the supplier.
Totally. And I think you hit on a very hidden benefit that customers sometimes discover. Let's call it a feature, not necessarily always a good one, is that you get the opportunity to visit those relationships and the dynamic, and also even sometimes surface more problems that just weren't visible as you dig into it, which I know we've also talked about. That's actually a great segue also into not just then the implementation and the go live, but also post go live value and things that you've observed, different and or things that have happened. Anything measurable that comes to mind around the buyer's day, supplier responsiveness, the accuracy of the data in the system of record or ERP that you have observed?
Yeah, actually. So yeah, we're much like our relationship with the suppliers and actively working on our workflow. That's also the case for our laborers here. The people who put in the labor to purchasing by the buyers, they also are not necessarily relearning these workflows, but they're getting the opportunity to revisit them, getting the opportunity to have discussions about them in a way that's outside of our previous paradigm, which that's always going to expose things that we need to fix, things that are already good and we can improve on. So yeah. Post implementation, it's been very good. I could honestly say that it's increased our capacity for high communication teamwork.
I love that. That's great because I think ultimately, I know this is a party line I constantly talk about, but I think leverage is a fantastic tool and something that is very helpful. But at the end of the day, it's still just a tool to be used by people in a capacity and how we think about applying AI and other capabilities to enable the humans to be more impactful. Well, I know as we look to wrap up quickly, something I always love to do is a little bit of a lightning round. There's a quick fire questions to you and get response. And so would love to trigger those off and I'll tee you the first one up here in a second. But I think as we think about the lightning rounds and even just the relationship there on how it ties to what you've learned, this is great to be able to hear and the context around what things were very impactful, what continue to need improvement or nurturing, and also where you think about going next with Urban Import and the foundation built. And so, yeah, here we are with the lightning questions. First one supply chain metric you would never run the Urban Import business without.
Oh, that's a good question. Supply chain metric. Oh, yeah. The rate of response. So the rate of acknowledgement requests that we've sent, and we can clearly see how many of those they've responded. That is so revealing. It lets us know exactly where we need to attack.
Love that. From your experience when it comes to safety stock or better information and data, if you had to pick one or the other, which would you pick first?
Better information and data for sure. It's critical.
Love that. All right, next one. What is one aftermarket automotive brand or product or vehicle platform you personally get excited about?
Honestly, Freedom Off Road. Freedom Off Road. That gets me going just because it really sucks to say it this way, but it's so American in a time that America is front and center. But I would say that it's American in a good way. New American.
Love that. And then final question, which I love to always ask, one piece of advice you'd give your younger self just starting in the industry?
I'd have to say to myself, follow your gut and do not be afraid to make declarations if you think they're right. And at the same time, don't be afraid to be wrong. And don't be afraid to change your mind.
I love that. Stick to your guns and strong opinions loosely held, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Jonathan, really appreciate you joining us. And this is a wrap up on leverage supply chains. Huge thank you for joining and taking us behind the catalog and into the operating system that keeps Urban Imports brands moving. The lesson obviously is bigger than just automotive. When a lean team is managing long lead times, supplier changes, inventory, better information is not just administrative efficiency. It definitely changes the decisions that businesses can make. So if this was useful, please subscribe, share the episode with other people that you know in your network or could benefit when it comes to supply chain operations, especially the leaders in your organization. I'm Andrew Stroup. See you next time.